Let's do the prayers. I forgot to send you the prayers, actually. Teresa. Okay. Let's do the prayers. Until I reach enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By accumulating merit and wisdom through generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Until I reach enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By accumulating merit and wisdom through generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Until I reach enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By accumulating merit and wisdom through generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment and anger that holds some close and others distant. I pay homage to the Sublime Mother of the victorious ones of the three times, the inexpressible, inconceivable, and indescribable perfection of wisdom, which is unborn, unceasing, and of the nature of space, and which is the object of realization of the self-knowing primordial wisdom. Okay. Now we still have a little bit left on what are called the three reasonings. Tell you the truth, we studied this in so much detail. And every time I listened to other classes, not the one I had, our class, of course, when I studied this, it was very extensive, but even listening to other classes in preparation for this material, it's very extensive, but I didn't like it. When I studied it, I didn't like this that much. Because, last time Maya said it, right from the beginning, they don't assert any of the pervasions that are in the three reasonings. None of the philosophers that we discussed, so Vaibhashika, Sautrantrika, Chittamatra, and Svatantrika, they don't assert it. So what's the point in debating it? But what I did realize was this whole exercise of still going through it, comparing, of course, the different assertions when it comes to what do you need to realize in order to become liberated? What do you need to realize in order to become enlightened? So just going through it, comparing the schools, and also using the tool of debate. Using the tool, we discussed the consequence, we discussed the syllogism. And I know it's complicated, it's difficult, not easy to use these syllogisms, not easy to use the consequences. It's difficult to understand the logic behind them, but still, they're ingenious. I remember when we studied a different topic called Tarik, Science and Reasons, I was so fascinated by the different explanations that were given, the definitions of each of the aspects of a correct syllogism, that it worked. I was like thinking, maybe I find some flaw in it. Maybe there's some flaw in the logic, but it wasn't there. I just needed to examine it for myself. And of course, it's just a tool. Logic is just a tool. And unfortunately, it's not going to do the job for us. I wish it was. Like when you hear, for instance, the second chapter of the Pramanavarttika, it provides reasonings, provides the logical reason for why reincarnation exists, or for why liberation exists, or for why. And you go, all I need to do is study this, read through the reasoning, and I get it. No, it's just a tool. And even just getting the reason, understanding the logic and all that doesn't mean we have all the requirements for fully understanding it. I gave you the simple example of a logical reason that we may use all the time. Take the subject, my neighbor's house, where smoke is billowing out of the window. It follows there's a fire because there's smoke. So we use it all the time. We use this kind of reasoning all the time. But unless we know what smoke is, and that wherever there is a certain quality of smoke, there must be fire, it's useless. And the same is true for the reasonings that established reincarnation and so forth. You need to know this relationship between the reason and the predicate. So in the case of smoke and fire, smoke is the reason, fire is the predicate. And what is to be established, the whole thesis, what is to be proven, what is to be established, is the presence of fire in my neighbor's house. That being relatively easy, but then when it comes to reincarnation, and it's not that straightforward. It follows you have been reincarnated because... No, it doesn't work like that. It's kind of a roundabout. It basically talks about the fact that the mind always continues, that the mind cannot go out of existence, that you can't have a first moment of awareness, a first moment of consciousness that was not preceded by another moment of consciousness. And so fully understanding that, then you can understand, okay, the first moment in this lifetime must have been preceded by a former moment of the same continuum, because otherwise it would be like getting something out of nothing. But before you get there, I guess it needs familiarity with your own mental continuum, very strong familiarity, like how does really every moment give to the next? How come I wake up in the morning in a grumpy mood because I went to sleep in a grumpy, where's that relation? Because it's the same continuum. And whatever state I was in last night has an effect on me today, and so on. Something we actually know instinctively, but when it comes to the first moment, that's somehow different. We know if I want to take an exam, I better learn for the exam. Just having brain surgery to get all the information into we know that's not going to work. So no, I need to mentally learn the facts in order then to be able to take an exam. So we actually know that, except for the first moment when we were born. Then things are different. Oh, that came from the genes, from my parents or whatever. Anyway, so the point I'm trying to make is that these logical statements in the form of consequences, in the form of syllogisms, they're difficult and they do require a lot of work from our own side in order to be really effective. And of course, in the end, they're just tools. Now, going back to what we've been discussing here, I've given extensive explanation of the first reasoning with some of the debate that you could do, or that is usually done. I didn't do that with the second and the third because the debate is pretty much the same. So I didn't go into that. But what we're going to discuss very soon, and this is again something, and that's part of the third reasoning actually. It's kind of like one of these ancillary topics. It comes up, and that would be something that you may find relevant, something you don't need to know syllogisms and consequences and all that, but you could think about using your own experience. There's two things. What comes first? And I'm putting it out here now because we have the discussion group and you've got plenty of time until, well, maybe it's Saturday we start with it. If not Saturday, then Tuesday. What comes first? Holding on to the intrinsic existence of phenomena other than the self, on to the intrinsic existence of the self. Which misconception comes first? So just to remind you, of course, as we remember, as I talked about a few times, the root of all our trouble, which is Acharya Chandrakirti is trying to establish this in here as part of the introduction, the root of all our trouble is the sense that there is something that can be found when it comes to the eye. There is something that can be found when it comes to the body. The body is not just labeled on the basis of something that is not the body. in the end, subtle atoms and so forth. And the self is not merely labeled on the basis of mind and body. There's a sense there's more to it. And now Acharya Chandrakirti, that is the Prasangika school, is trying to establish that that is impossible. That is an exaggerated way of looking at how things actually exist. So we need to negate the part that is exaggerated. We make phenomena more real than they actually are, for lack of a better word. So sometimes they talk about realism, saying that phenomena exist intrinsically. That's a kind of realism in the sense that if you look long enough, you'll find something there. If you search for phenomena long enough, you'll find the self, right? I always make fun of people in that way, but just because I did the same thing. We kind of realized it's not that easy, so we traveled to Asia to find ourselves. That's why I traveled the world, to find myself. So we kind of understand that it's a little harder. So staying at home is not a solution, but you have to travel the world or whatever, do whatever. No, but the point is there's a sense, if you search for something, if you search for the self long enough, you'll find it. When actually it's the opposite. The more you search for it, the less solid it is, the less concrete it appears to your mind. In fact, you start losing it, which makes us think possibly it doesn't exist at all. But of course, that's also not the case. Therefore, this middle way, it's not non-existent, but it also doesn't exist as concretely as it seems. And that is so huge, because any negative emotion that we have, any affliction we have, is always involved in the sense of a self that exists more or exists in a way in which it impossibly can, in which it not possibly can, in other words. Every time, and we're not even aware of it. We're so involved in our attachment, we're so busy with our anger, we're not even aware of it. So the good thing from now on, getting angry, is that it gives us an opportunity to check, where is the sense of I, right? Where is that sense of self? And what I also mentioned a few times, the sense of taking it personally, right? That I take something personally. It's really saying myself, my I, the way I perceive of myself, of an exaggerated I, that comes into play. Previously, okay, there's a person just shouting outside on the road and insulting people. I don't take that personally, because it's not directed at me personally, although they're looking at me and they're shouting at me, but I don't take it. Versus one person of the crowd, they smile at everyone, but they insult me. That is personal. So it feels very strongly, I am where's that I? What a great opportunity. It's almost like stop time, hold the anger, and check. But that's not usually what we do. Anyway, what comes first? That's the question. And of course, this is a chicken-egg kind of question to a certain degree, because we can't really say this came first and that came first. But conventionally, or in terms of the distance between those two moments, first there's a perception of an intrinsic body, for instance, and then there is a sense of an intrinsic I. So which one is it? Which one is usually set to come first? Holding on to the intrinsic, and you don't have to answer it now, but it's something to think about until we get to this point. So what comes first? When self-centeredness arises. Of course, as we have heard many times so far, self-centeredness is the main problem, in that directly affects our other afflictions. But the root, of course, is holding on to the intrinsic existence of an I. Let me just go through the stages again. So we perceive of a self that exists in and of itself, that seems to be findable. If you search long enough, there's something that is not just labeled on the basis of mind and body, but something solid, concrete there, for lack of a better word, concrete. That's the first, that's the root. And that in itself, if it just remained with that, if our mind were just, focusing on that and nothing else happened, I don't think the Buddha would have ever talked about selflessness. That's not a big deal as such, except for its consequences. That's the big deal. So what happens then, having that sense of a concrete I, our mind, perceiving this I to be closer to it, now exaggerates its importance. It starts exaggerating. It has already exaggerated in terms of how it perceives the self to exist. It adds more to the self than there actually is, which is why in the texts they talk about this root misconception that I just described is a superimposing mind versus a denigrating mind. They do distinguish between two wrong views. One that adds something and one that takes off, or I don't know, like denies the existence of something that's actually there. That is a wrong view we don't need to worry about here. We're not denying the existence of something that is actually there, but we're adding more to the I than is actually there. So the I, we add something to the way the I actually exists. So we exaggerate its existence, which then leads to exaggeration. From then on, the ball keeps rolling. So it keeps rolling in the sense of we keep exaggerating. Every one of our afflictions, with a few exceptions, for instance, perceiving the non-existence of the law of cause and effect, in particular the law of karma, that's also an affliction. But all our afflictive emotions in particular, so our anger, our attachment, our envy, they're all exaggerating. They're all perceiving more than there actually is. Starting with the misconception, giving rise to the sense, I'm more important. This I that I've now suddenly conjured up, that I've projected in my mind, that is more important than the I of others. Right? I perceive you having an intrinsic I, but you are far from my mind. My mind is located here. So my awareness is located in this body at this point, because my mind was reincarnated in this particular body. Well, it was just a cell when I started, but then it grew bigger and bigger and bigger, and these two are now karmically connected. So it's not like my mind goes off and, is in the middle of the market for a few hours and comes back, in the meantime, I'm just sitting here. No. It's there all the time while I'm awake in particular. And there's a sense, and I keep reinforcing that, of course, like constantly, the sense that, oh yeah, there's all, you guys exist intrinsically over there and your personality is findable. Yes, fine. But you're just over there. I'm here, close to my mind. And this is very precious. This I is very precious, and its happiness is very precious. That is still not the self-centeredness. But based on that exaggerated view, attachment to I and mine arises, right? Not being able to let go. My happiness, being so attached to it. And that is called self-cherishing or self-centeredness, whichever word or term you want to use. And that's where the whole trouble starts. Now, all my actions are motivated by that, wanting to secure my happiness, wanting to secure, my benefit, wanting to help the I, more than anyone else. It's exaggerated. It has exaggerated, and while the self-cherishing is going on, it's exaggerating its importance. And then, of course, based on that I have attachment towards other people. I exaggerate their importance. Oh, they're so wonderful, they're so perfect. On an emotional level, I see their good qualities. On a rational level, I may know, oh yeah, they have some faults or some flaws. But emotionally, I don't care. Either I totally ignore it, or if I don't ignore it, it's not relevant. It's not part of my emotional world. Or the other way around, they do something that really upsets me. And then I see this, just a sec, I see this person as so negative, as just terrible. Like if you really don't like someone, you have that constant resentment towards them. It's easier to recognize. I'm giving that example. But of course, we have our moments. But if it's going on for quite a while, then we become quite familiar with that. We may know intellectually that that person has positive qualities, but we don't care. It's the negative on an emotional level. It's the negativity that bothers us. It's that, therefore, every time we think about them, and there's an emotional, especially when we're resentful, it's a strong emotional state, we're just focusing, we're obsessing over the negativities. Not that there may be found a cure to cancer or a cure for cancer or something. That's not something. So anyway, the point is, therefore, there's this chain, and once self-centeredness has taken root, which it will because of the misconception, then all the other afflictions come effortlessly. So easy to have all the other ones. Yet, of course, we can try to reduce self-centeredness, and we're trying to do that. We have to, as part of our practice. The stronger it is, the less, or the less likely it is that we understand how the self really exists, because they're in contradiction. Our self-centeredness and the lack of our self existing intrinsically, that understanding, they're in total contradiction. So it's like you can't work with a strong self-centered mind, which is why we try to reduce it. We try to reduce the afflictions as well, just to get that intelligence, that wisdom working. So how do we get this working? By constantly being aware. I mean, trying to, first of all, generate mindfulness. Some people accuse the Tibetan Buddhist tradition that they don't emphasize mindfulness enough. But to me, it's a bit like they don't emphasize it as much because it's like, it's a given. It's like, do I have to talk about the sun rising in the east every day? No, we know that. I don't need to emphasize that every day. So it's a bit like in the text, it's like, of course. So they don't talk much about it. It's like, of course, you need to be mindful, introspection, vigilance, and remembering what you're trying to focus on. So once, and that is explained, of course, there are explanations found in the texts on that, especially in Logik, you find these different mental factors, and it's explained. But so once you get your mindfulness running, then what comes first? Do I first perceive of myself as intrinsically existent, and then of my body, and then of myself, or the other way around? That's one difficulty. So which comes first, in other words, holding on to, and like, you don't need to answer it. I'm just saying that's one of your homeworks. And then even more difficult, what do you need to realize first? What is easier to realize, that the self doesn't exist intrinsically, or that phenomena other than the self don't exist intrinsically? In order to understand emptiness for the first time, which one comes first? And there's an argument for both. I can, share that with you. I mean, thinking about a table, how it cannot be found among its parts, seems so much easier than understanding that there is no self. Or a car, let's say a car. Because a car is so much more useful than a table, and it has so many more parts. At least it has more parts that have names. It's really hard. Okay, because we can probably agree that this table has less subtle atoms than a car. But like, let's say you have this huge table that's bigger than a car. So you could say, okay, the table actually has more parts because it's made up of more atoms. But at least the car has more parts that has names, which I have no idea what they are. I can maybe count 5. I know it's 5 names, but never mind. So therefore, the point is that, therefore, it seems the more complicated something is, the harder it gets to understand that it doesn't exist intrinsically. And then add the mind, and it gets really complicated. So on one hand, we may think, okay, it's so much easier to understand that the body doesn't exist intrinsically, or the table versus the self, which consists of mind and body. But then again, we're much more familiar with the self, because we're thinking I all day long. So we should really know I. I don't think I have the thought table a lot. Doesn't come up. It's I, right? So I should be more familiar with I and mine. Again, an argument, or a different argument. Therefore, it's easier to realize selflessness of the I versus selflessness of the table. So what is it? What do you think? And then you have different texts emphasizing different things. This text, if you're familiar with Acharya Chandrakirti, what comes first? Selflessness of person or selflessness of phenomena? No, phenomena comes first. In the 6th chapter, really diving into selflessness in a more intense, I mean, we've already talked about it, but actually the selflessness of person comes more towards the end of the 6th chapter. So when we study Madhyamika, we study this topic for 3 years, very intensely, every day, and so forth. So it's pretty intense, but it comes only in the 3rd year. It's called Dango, which means negating the I. Dango, negating the I. So, but then you have other texts where selflessness is described first. For instance, Precious Garland. Yes, Precious Garland talks about selflessness first. Selflessness of person, sorry. Selflessness of person first. So who's wrong? Which one comes first? Which one should come first? And there are different views on that, but I want you to think about this, to reflect on it. The first one, of course, is very practical. Okay, I'm upset right now, so which one came first? Do I recognize in my own mental continuum that moment of me, they said this to me, right? In the case of aversion, or in the case of attachment, strong attachment, I want this coffee. I ordered first. They're bringing it to this other person first, right? So I want my coffee. So in that moment, what came first? A sense that the body exists intrinsically, or the coffee for that matter, or the self? What comes first? And then, of course, what would you realize? Yeah, so just something you could spend your weekend, tomorrow on. Okay. So we have a little bit left of this kind of difficult topic here. Now, you remember last time we discussed, is this a correct consequence or not, that Acharya Chandrakirti is using? If it's not a correct consequence, why would he cite a wrong consequence? But, I mean, wrong consequences are, I don't even know whether you would say wrong, it's a strong word. It's just not a correct consequence where all the contradictory views are given, like there are these 3 contradictory views the person must have, and only then is this consequence, this kind of logical statement effective. But they can still be effective in other ways, right? And as we've seen, none of those philosophers, well, except none of the philosophers, of course, the Prasangika is out. Prasangika, if you're a Prasangika person, you don't need that kind of consequence. That doesn't need to be cited. But all the other philosophers, well, they don't agree with the Prasangika, and that logical statement should actually be addressed to them. But they don't hold these 3 contradictory positions, so it's not working. And why did Acharya Chandrakirti recite it anyway, if it's not a correct consequence? But I mean, there are situations where you could argue, and I don't know, this is just a matter of opinion here, but if you are a Buddhist philosopher, do you really have to be one of the 4 Buddhist philosophers? Actually, you may change, you may first follow the Svatantrika school, because, well, it makes sense that you would want to follow the Svatantrika school simply because they do assert intrinsic existence. And for all of you who've done the meditation, who've done the analysis, I guess you would come to the point where you think, that's really difficult. Like, lack of intrinsic existence, it seems like there's nothing there. I think, honestly, in the very beginning, that's just a very natural reaction to feel that can't be right. That can't be right. That there's nothing, I mean, like, you can't find anything. You search for the I among the body, all you find is a body. But then when you search for the body, you don't find that. And you go all the way down to the atoms. Take apart an atom, you don't find the atom. Then you take now I'm running out of names, the subatomic particle, right? Take them apart, and there's nothing essential there. All of these parts are also just labeled. So it seems like you can go endlessly. So, I mean, we're not going to go endlessly, obviously, but we know you can go on endlessly, and it seems I've labeled something on the basis of nothing, because there's never anything findable. So what's the conclusion? There can't be anything. And then you hear from the Svatantrika and they say, oh, don't worry. Yeah, you can search, but you find something. There is something there. And we go, oh, okay. That kind of like, that feels right. That feels right. So no surprise, there were many followers of the Svatantrika, also in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. I mean, in the very beginning, Shantarakshita, he was the great Indian Nalanda master who was very instrumental in bringing Buddhism to Tibet, very instrumental in finding the first, or establishing the first monastery with the first 7 months, only 7. Pardon? Yeah, exactly, Samyeling. So he was a follower of the Svatantrika. Now, you could be someone who leaves behind the Svatantrika school and enters the Prasangika, right? But when you enter the Prasangika, you don't have to take on everything right from the beginning. You could be someone who leaves behind the Svatantrika school. So it's not like, okay, I don't accept intrinsic existence, but you don't assert you don't assert everything that the Prasangika says. You assert certain things, but not everything. So you're not fully a Prasangika person any longer, but you're still a Buddhist tenet holder, right? You assert 4 essential tenets. What are these 4 essential tenets? Does anyone know? The 4 seals, right? The 4 seals. All conditioned phenomena are impermanent. All contaminated phenomena are in the nature of suffering. All phenomena lack a self. And nirvana is peace. The real peace is nirvana, right? So those are those are the 4 kind of root tenets. And if you follow these, you're a Buddhist tenet holder. If you accept those, you're not necessarily Buddhist. Being a Buddhist and being a Buddhist tenet holder are 2 different things, right? If you're a Buddhist tenet holder, you don't have to be a Buddhist. What does it mean to be a Buddhist? Taking refuge, exactly, taking refuge. And that is not, don't have to do a ceremony. For Westerners, we have that. But actually, strictly speaking, you could be a Buddhist 1 minute and not the next, and then again, as long as you, take refuge internally. So, which is really just another way of saying seeking the solutions in the 3 jewels, mainly in the Dharma. So seeking the solutions that you usually do, you get a headache or, I don't know, you feel grumpy, have a bar of chocolate, but at the same time, that's not taking refuge. But, do this, follow the ways you usually try to solve a problem, but also look, what suggestion, what solution does the Dharma offer in any situation? So what does the Dharma do? To not ignore the Dharma. Of the 3 objects of refuge, Dharma is the main refuge. And taking refuge, I don't like that word that much. Because, what does it mean? We are all refugees? The word taking refuge seems to imply we are refugees. We cannot protect ourselves, which is true. But... which is, in a way, we are harming ourselves all the time. So we're definitely not the best protection of ourselves. But besides that, I don't know how to put it. It doesn't really catch the meaning of it. Taking refuge is not like saying, I'm this little person and I can't do anything, so just take care of me. No, actually, that's not what it is. I mean, no one is going to take care of us, unfortunately, Be nice if there was a creator, God, and omnipotent and, would take away. Honestly, I'd prefer that. So much hard work. Yeah, I mean, Buddhism, the problem is you have to take personal responsibility for everything. No one is going to do it for you. And of course, from a Christian point of view, that's different. But then I would argue, has it happened for you already? Have all your troubles been taken away? So I don't know, but we're not arguing with any of the other systems. It doesn't matter. And of course, it's very important to have the other religions. But my point is that taking refuge can be easily misunderstood, as if someone will take care of us now, which is not happening. No, it's rather someone is presenting a medicine to our problem. That is a different type of medicine we usually take. So the medicine we usually take, that's fine. I don't know, when we're feeling depressed, binging on chocolate, or I don't know, on TV series or whatever. I'm not saying do or don't, but no one is saying you can't. But that is just one way. There's a new way. If you become a Buddhist, look at the Dharma and see what solution does the Dharma bring. So what medicine does the Dharma offer? And then you still have to take the medicine. No one is going to take it for you. That's taking refuge, and that's what it means to be a Buddhist. But being a Buddhist tenet holder is different. So you can be both, neither, or one of those two. Okay, so a Buddhist tenet holder is therefore not necessarily a person of the Svatantrika conviction or Sautrantika view, and none of the other ones. You could be in between, like I'm saying. You could be in between as well, which would be an answer here, possibly. Like someone who doesn't fully accept what the Prasangika school says yet, so don't necessarily assert the Prasangika view all the way, and holds some contradictory views. And for that person, Acharya Chandrakirti posited these three reasonings. That would be a way to look at it, wouldn't it? But that doesn't take us around doing the analysis, nevertheless, in case we overlooked something. Okay. So I'm going to still guide you through one more debate, one more kind of reflection that you may find tiresome, but never mind. Anyway, anything we do in Buddhism is never easy. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. So one last analysis would, yes?
You said this is for a Sangika tenet holder who doesn't accept all of our views.
Yes.
But could it be also for a Chittamatra or Svatantrika tenet holder with some modification of a syllogism, like changing of relation?
Pardon? The last
bit? Could this syllogism, could its consequence with some modification be a valid consequence for Chittamatra or Svatantrika?
Could that syllogism, with some modification, become a correct syllogism for the Chittamatra or Sautrantrika? Well, think about it.
What I thought is maybe if you change the relation, like instead of like someone who doesn't know inherent existence, just changing it to object of negation of each tenet.
The problem is that these contradictions are so obvious that these are like contradictions that are pretty big, right? The contradictions that we are talking about here that are part of this consequence, that it's difficult to find someone who actually holds these two contradictory views. I'm not saying that the Svatantrika doesn't hold contradictory views. Yeah. They do say on one hand phenomena exist dependently, and on the other hand they exist intrinsically. That is a contradictory view. But here asserting the pervasion on one hand and the opposite of the thesis on the other, that contradiction is too obvious. It would be difficult to find a Buddhist tenet holder who really holds this as part of their tenet. I don't think a modification would be possible here. That's why my take would be either they're not correct consequences that you never...
You need to realize emptiness of true existence, whereas Shravakas don't need to realize it.
Right.
Don't realize like autonomous substantial existence self.
So, well, going back to the original kind of discussions we had, does a bodhisattva on the first ground, in this Svatantrika school, right? A bodhisattva on the first ground, they realize emptiness. But heroes and solitary realizers don't. So they accept that a bodhisattva outshines, or is, let's put it in a different way, that a bodhisattva is superior or surpasses heroes and solitary realizers from the point of view of intelligence or wisdom. Yeah, that's okay. That's fine.
No?
But the Ten Bhumi Sutra is not talking from the Svatantrika school point of view.
But it's the word of a Buddha, so we don't have to accept it?
They interpret it differently. I don't know, there's a subject that maybe many of you haven't studied yet. It's the subject matter of interpretative and definitive sutras. So a lot of the teachings of the Buddha, it's actually a whole subject we do, or like a whole a topic we study in some detail. Because what's so difficult is that the Buddha gave teachings that cannot be accepted literally. Well, simply because, of course, he taught in such a way that whoever he met, he gave a teaching according to that person's need. And sometimes he even said that there is an intrinsic self, if it helped that person. In fact, when you look at the Vaibhashika and the Sautrantrika, I mean, there are certain views they have that we also have. And then later on, as you move through the different schools, they're negated. So it's just helpful to learn these views, to become aware we have them as well, to become aware of some of our wrong views. It sometimes really takes becoming conscious of them. Now, the Buddha having given all these different views, therefore, they sometimes share the same sutra and they interpret it differently. The Perfection of Wisdom Sutra is the best example. No eye, no ear, no nose, no. But the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, they're so ingenious in that you can interpret them in different ways, right? If it says there's no eye, no ear, no nose, well, you say it doesn't exist truly, as the Svatantrika school says, right? The Svatantrika school doesn't say phenomena cannot be found. When you search for the eye, eventually you'll find it. There's some essence there that accounts for that is the eye. So you can't go on endlessly to search for something and come to the conclusion nothing is findable. But they say that nothing exists without appearing to the mind, without appearing to a correct mind. So that part they cover. They interpret no eye, no ear, no nose from that perspective. And sometimes the way they interpret things is a little bit like, oops. It says very obviously, doesn't exist intrinsically. It says that. So that actually means, but they interpreted, but it means ultimately it doesn't exist intrinsically. So truly it doesn't, they find ways around it. But that's, again, incredible that the Buddha gives teachings that are useful for so many people based on their own views. And that's unique. I mean, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, for years, I remember that people would go to these teachings. So I would know some geshes, really advanced in their understanding and everything, and they'd come back from these teachings and say, that was so profound. Oh my gosh, His Holiness made that profound point. That was so amazing. How could anyone understand this who hasn't studied the Dharma? And then I'd meet someone who'd never studied Buddhism, and they're like, that was incredible. I learned so much. And you're like, did you go to the same teaching? Right? It's like a teacher like His Holiness teaches in such a way that everyone gets something. It's not like, someone else just, an ordinary person would just say something and half of the people are totally confused and the rest maybe understands a little bit. No, it's like everyone gets something out of it. That is the quality of a pure teacher, of a real teacher. And the Buddha was like that. And now we have, of course, the teachings written down and they reflect that they can be interpreted in different ways, yeah. So we study this actually as a separate subject, understanding how do they account for the Buddha saying there's no eye, no ear, no nose. How do they interpret it? How do others interpret it? And again, in that way, we understand the different schools better again. And understanding them, of course, is a stepping stone to understanding the highest view. Okay. I'm tiptoeing around the last bit I need to take you through. There is a further debate that usually comes up in the, Doris, you raised your hand and I never answered your question. Has it been answered?
I think it cleared itself.
Okay, it's good. Okay, all right, great, thank you. So there's one more part that is often debated a lot in the context of having a syllogism. So you remember a syllogism just states absurdities of someone's view. So it follows that. It follows, and often, as I said, the absurdity is presented. Now, having done that with the first syllogism we discussed last time, there are certain syllogisms now that can actually be changed around or reformulated into a syllogism. Now, just the main difference between a consequence and a syllogism, a consequence is often not correct, as in like not factually correct. It just points out the absurdities according to the other person's view. So it follows. If you assert, remember, of course, the example we had before, where we actually do have, what was the example I gave? Where we have a contradictory view, where we do accept the provision, we do accept the reason, but we accept the opposite of the thesis. What was the example I gave in the handout? The dying, exactly. So this is an interesting example, which I think we can all identify with, where on an intellectual level, we assert the provision, which is saying whoever is a human being, or an ordinary human being, I should probably say, but let's say just without talking about special beings. So whoever is a human being faces the possibility of dying tomorrow. Okay, there's no certainty as when we die, therefore whoever is an ordinary being could die tomorrow. We all accept that intellectually. We also accept that we know we are a human being, but we believe we're not going to die tomorrow. No, it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's just not. Of all the plans we've made for the next week, death is not on there, or at least the possibility is not even considered. So that's an example where you have the three, what do you call it? Contradictory views. Yes, whoever is a human being could die tomorrow. I'm a human being, but I'm not going to die tomorrow. Contradictory view. Now, the syllogism here is in accordance with reality. Take the subject yourself, you could die tomorrow because you're a human being. But then to have an absurdity, we could use it differently. We could use other examples. I gave you the example where it's not that straightforward, but take the example of, on one hand, I believe beauty lies in the eye of the beholder. In other words, beauty is subjective. It's not objective. But the way I'm dressed is beautiful, or the way the decoration in my house, that is beautiful, and that in my neighbors, they've got no taste. So then you could argue, for instance, so regarding the subject, your decoration in your room, it follows it is ugly. It follows it is ugly because it is ugly from the perspective of your neighbor. So you go, no pervasion. So it follows that there is a pervasion because because beauty lies in the eye of the beholder. So in other words, whatever is beautiful is necessarily subjectively so, right? So therefore, it follows that the decoration in your room is ugly because your neighbor thinks so. It follows that the decoration in your house is not beautiful because it is ugly. Yeah, so you see how these absurdities suddenly, if you accept that, and on the other hand, you accept your own house is beautiful. So you do have that assertion that beauty is subjective. And at the same time, you're convinced your decoration is beautiful, that of your neighbor is ugly. And so either it's both or it's neither, and you can argue along these lines, and it does become absurd. Because saying that something is not beautiful, that's absurd. That's also saying nothing is long or short. Because long is only long in relation to something shorter, and short is only long in relation to something longer. Just as beauty is beautiful in relation to one person and ugly in relation to someone else. So beauty and ugliness exist, but whatever exists, it's much easier to say in Tibetan, beautiful or ugly, beautiful and ugly, in other words. So is this beautiful? Because in relation to some person it is. Is this ugly? Because in relation to someone else it is. Is this long and short both? Aren't they contradictory? Isn't it contradictory to be long and short? Aren't hot and cold contradictory? Beautiful and ugly? You see? Yeah, so it's actually when I throw all these arguments at you, it gets a little bit difficult. Because we accept all of it, but there seems to be a contradiction. And to figure out which is the contradictory or which is the wrong view takes some time. Anyway, my point is that consequences can be in accordance with reality. I mean, they can make perfectly sense. It follows I could die tomorrow. That makes perfectly sense. Or they could be absurd. My decoration follows it's ugly because my neighbor thinks so. there's a perversion, because if I think it's ugly, it's ugly. So therefore, it's kind of pretty equal. If they think it's ugly, then, and so forth. Having said this, so a consequence, hopefully it's clear, absurdities are being pointed out in general, but now you can reformulate this consequence and change it into a syllogism. And these are always factually correct. You don't say X, take the subject X, it follows. You don't use that wording, because you're not trying to point out that your view leads to this conclusion, but rather you're saying it is. So you're trying to establish something. Take the subject, my neighbor's house, there is a fire because there's smoke. That would be a correct syllogism. And these are also used. Usually consequences are used first, especially in the Prasangika school. They're said to be very powerful in order to overcome some of our wrong views and lead us in the right direction. But a syllogism, A is B because it's C, is also used. X is Y because it's Z, it's also used. So now here on page 159, we're looking at, is this particular consequence that we've just gone through, is it one of the type that can be reformulated as a syllogism, as a correct syllogism, I should say, though that's not part of the way the Tibetan, no, a correct consequence that can be reformulated as a syllogism, yes. So that is the one option, or a correct syllogism that cannot be reformulated as a syllogism. With syllogism here, of course, referring to a correct syllogism. Okay. Yeah, so the former refers to a consequence that can be converted into a correct syllogism while retaining the same subject. In such a case, the opposite of the consequence's predicate becomes the reason of the syllogism, while the opposite of its reason becomes the predicate of that syllogism. I know that I'm expecting a lot, but in Tibetan you get pretty quickly figure it out. Dalo cholo, dalo chusko, cholo dasko. It even is difficult to say. Dalo chusko, cholo dasko. So you're basically saying you recite the opposite of the predicate as the reason, and the opposite of the reason as the predicate. I gave you one example before that works best in this case. I gave you the example of someone believing that sound is permanent, right? There are in India, there were philosophers that debated with the Buddhist philosophers, and they accepted that sound is permanent. That sound is always there, and then every now and then it manifests in the form of a person's voice and so forth. I don't fully understand that view, but the point is, yes, there was definitely that assertion that sound is permanent. While from a Buddhist point of view, impossible. All conditioned phenomena are impermanent. So sound is conditioned. Sound is created by many, many causes and conditions. Therefore, it must be impermanent. And these non-Buddhist philosophers, they would also accept that whatever is a product, whatever is produced by causes and conditions, must be impermanent. But at the same time, they thought that sound is permanent. So here you have these three contradictions. And the classical consequence they would recite would be, take the subject sound, it follows it's not a product because it's permanent. Which here it's an absurdity, it's obvious that that's absurd because they would never accept that. They did accept that sound was the result of many causes and conditions, but it's still permanent. From a Buddhist point of view, that is also one of the reasons why they say God, if there's a creator God, at least this creator God must be impermanent. Because there's certain causes and conditions that change God. As in, like, if you read the Bible, one moment God was pleased and then God was not pleased and so forth. So there were certain causes and conditions. The actions of, those who believed in God either pleased God or they didn't. So there were causes and conditions. Therefore, God cannot be permanent because God in every moment is a product of certain causes and conditions. But that if you accept that God is a product of causes and conditions, in other words, that God can be pleased, it follows God is not a product of causes and conditions because God is permanent. So you can use God, a creator God, or you can use sound. Here we use sound. So take the subject sound, it follows it's not a product because it's permanent. It cannot be affected by other things. It's permanent. It cannot change in dependence on other causes and conditions. So that's considered to be a correct consequence because the person, the addressee, the person it was addressed towards, accepted that whatever is impermanent must be a product. Therefore, whatever is not a product, whatever is a product is necessarily impermanent. Therefore, if something is not impermanent, it cannot be a product. That's the logic. But at the same time, they thought sound was a product. So they accept the opposite of the thesis that sound is not a product. They don't accept that. So they accept the pervasion, but they accept that sound is permanent, accept the reason sound is permanent, and they accept that whatever is permanent must be a non-product because whatever is a product must be impermanent, right? Therefore, these three contradictions are given. Thus, it's a correct consequence for that person. And now you can reformulate it into a syllogism. So you take the opposite of the reason and recite that with the same subject. The subject is retained. Take the subject sound. Now you take the opposite of the reason, which becomes now the predicate. What is that? Impermanent. And then you take the opposite of the predicate, which is non-product. It's the opposite of that is product. So you cite the syllogism, take the subject sound. It is impermanent because it's a product. That's a correct statement. Therefore, in this case, it's very effective. You don't always have that. It's always dependent on the person's views, their contradictory views. But in the case of sound, take the subject sound, it's not a product because it's impermanent. Once they let go, because they realize, oh, there's some contradiction. And so they can let go of that contradiction, and they may even accept that sound is impermanent, but to actually fully realize it, someone needs to make that statement. Take the subject sound, it is impermanent because it's a subject. Because it's a product, sorry. It's a product of causes and conditions. And then based on that, they can actually come to realize, to incontrovertibly know that sound is impermanent. Okay, and that's what we're doing here with the consequence we had before. Okay, does anyone remember the consequence we had before? No, of course not. No, I have to read it. So what was the consequence before that Acharya Chandrakirti recited? It was, take the subject, an arhat, hero, solitary realizer, so an arhat, someone who's attained liberation. It follows that bodhisattvas on the first ground are capable of surpassing them in terms of their intelligence because they're beings who have not attained the realization of the absence of intrinsic existence. Okay, so now if you reformulate it into a syllogism, that's just part of the analysis. So you could say, now in the first reasoning, the opposite of the predicate is bodhisattvas on the first ground are not capable of surpassing them in terms of intelligence, and the opposite of the reason is a being who's attained the realization of the absence of intrinsic existence. Accordingly, in the case of the first reasoning, the corresponding syllogism would be, take the subject, an arhat, same subject. They're a being who has attained the realization of the absence of intrinsic existence. They have realized emptiness. They have realized that there's nothing that exists intrinsically because bodhisattvas on the first ground are not capable of surpassing them in terms of intelligence. That we're familiar with, right? Yes, of course, like a bodhisattva on the 8th ground. So, yeah, they can't be are not on the first ground, are not capable of surpassing them. So even, no, the bodhisattva on the first ground, that's wrong. Never mind. Why did I say bodhisattvas on the 8th ground? That's totally wrong. Because bodhisattvas on the first ground are not capable of surpassing them. Oh, no. Yeah, that's right. Like bodhisattvas on the 8th ground, yeah. So just like bodhisattvas on the 8th ground, bodhisattvas on the first ground are not capable of surpassing them in terms of intelligence, and they have realized the absence of intrinsic existence. So both aspects. The reason is usually the example, for instance, like a bodhisattva on the 8th ground. I cannot explain this to you on the basis of this because you get confused. I'll go back to the syllogism of the fire and the smoke. If you want to realize that there is fire in your neighbor's house. Okay, so I'm going to cite a syllogism. I'm going to say, take the subject, your neighbor's house where there's smoke billowing out of the window. It follows, no, there is a fire because there is smoke. For instance, as on the campfire, right? So basically, what I'm doing here is, if I address this syllogism to you, if I cite this directed at you, then I'm reminding you, okay, you know, when there's smoke, there's fire, like in a campfire. Now that sounds a bit like you're doing this, you're citing this to like a child, basically. We don't need to remind it of that. So that's true. Ordinarily, it would be weird to do that, but it's not so much about being weird or not. It's saying that the pervasion here must be understood. In order for a syllogism to be effective, you must know that whatever is the reason must be the predicate. So wherever there's fire, wherever there's smoke, there's fire. Which in the case of such an easy syllogism, we know naturally, but it's still part of a syllogism, that you have an example, that you understand the pervasion on the basis of an example. So here you understand the pervasion that if a bodhisattva on the first ground is not capable of surpassing something in terms of intelligence, then that person must have realized the absence of intrinsic existence. So the bodhisattva on the 8th ground is such an example. Bodhisattvas on the first ground are not capable of surpassing them in terms of intelligence because they realized emptiness. Right?
The bodhisattva on the 8th ground does surpass.
No, but that's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Bodhisattvas on the first grounds are not surpassing them. Who's the surpasser? The ones on the first ground. Right? Bodhisattvas on the 8th ground, it follows that bodhisattvas on the first ground are not capable of surpassing them. Do you agree?
Slowly. Slowly.
I know. This is what's so difficult about this, because the wording, them. You know, if you look at this, bodhisattvas on the first ground are not capable of surpassing them. No, the bodhisattvas on the 8th ground. That's just the example. No, the subject is the... No, let's go back to the fire and the smoke. The fire and the smoke, right? So wherever there's fire, there's smoke. What is the example? The campfire. So now you check the campfire. First, before you can understand that pervasion on the basis of the subject, before you can understand wherever there's smoke, there must be fire. When you understand that in your neighbor's house there's a fire, what did you understand? The pervasion on the basis of the subject. You've understood that because there is smoke in my neighbor's house, there is therefore a fire in there, right? If this is a correct syllogism, let's say you haven't realized yet that because you realize that there is smoke coming from your neighbor's house, let's say you're a little bit slow because the syllogism is so easy to understand and we use it all the time. But let's say you don't know. You're a child and you don't realize on the basis of the syllogism, you don't realize yet that if in your neighbor's house there is smoke, in your neighbor's house there must be a fire. You haven't realized that yet. Now I give you an example. I say, look at a campfire. Do you understand that because there is smoke above that campfire or above that camping ground, therefore there is a fire? And you go, oh yeah, that I understand. On the basis of the example, I understand this. So if you understand that on the basis of the camping ground, where the fire is obvious, right? The example is always something that's a little obvious in that, yeah, you understand that the campfire is both. There is smoke, there's fire. Therefore, because there is smoke, there's fire. You understand that on the basis of the camping ground. The neighbor's house is a little bit more tricky because you can't see the fire. Windows are closed. I should have said that. Windows are all closed, shutters are drawn, but the smoke comes out. So in this case, it's a little harder to understand there's no fire because it's not obvious. Therefore, on the basis of the smoke, you now realize, oh, because there is smoke, there is fire in my neighbor's house. That's when you know there's fire in your neighbor's house, just as with the campfire. So the campfire goes first. Now, when you realize it on the basis of the example, you realize that it's both. There is smoke, there is fire. Now you do the same here with this example. Based on this example, you understand bodhisattvas on the first ground are not capable of surpassing them in terms of intelligence, and they are a being who's attained the realization of the absence of intrinsic existence. In fact, why is a first ground bodhisattva not able to surpass an 8th ground bodhisattva in terms of wisdom? Because they realize emptiness. Right? Does that make sense? A Buddha, let's say a Buddha. I take a Buddha now. A Buddha. Sorry. Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. I should speak slowly. A Buddha has realized emptiness. Right? A Buddha has realized emptiness. You agree? So does a first ground bodhisattva surpass a Buddha in terms of having realized emptiness? A first ground, I'm not saying does a Buddha surpass a first ground bodhisattva, of course. No. But does a first ground bodhisattva surpass a Buddha in terms of intelligence? No, why not? Because they've realized emptiness. So if someone has realized emptiness, a first ground bodhisattva does not surpass them in terms of wisdom, right? So, like an 8th ground bodhisattva. An 8th ground bodhisattva is not surpassed by a bodhisattva on the first ground because they've realized emptiness. So that pervasion works on the basis of this 8th ground bodhisattva. On the basis of an 8th ground bodhisattva, you can understand that a bodhisattva on the first ground is not capable of surpassing them in terms of wisdom because they have realized emptiness.
But there's still this first sentence. Take the subject, the hero, and the solitary realizers, arhat. They are a being who has attained the realization of the absence of intrinsic existence. And then comes the bodhisattva. So this first sentence makes no sense then.
No.
Don't need this first
No, okay. Okay, I'll say it differently. Okay. A is B because it's C. For example, D. Right? A is B because it's C. For example, let's say F because D and C sound similar. Take A, it follows it's B because it's C. For instance, F. Now, in order to understand that A is B, right? A is B. I try to understand that A is B on the basis of C. So understanding, because A is C, it must be B. But I can't do that right away, right? A being C, for instance, fire in my neighbor's house, or let's say sound. Okay, take the subject sound. Because it's a product, it must be impermanent. First, I may not understand it. Okay, sound, yes, it is a product of its own causes and conditions. But I haven't understood fully that therefore it's impermanent. Okay, so take the subject sound. It is impermanent because it's a product. I have not been able to understand the pervasion, whatever there, because the sound is a product, therefore it is impermanent. That's what you're trying to understand. So I take something simpler. The last moment of a candle flame. Because one moment it's there and the next it's gone. With sound, it's not like that, right? Sound, like if you have the sound om, for instance, it's like, lasts for quite a while, yeah? I don't know, for lack of a better example, like just some monotone kind of sound. It goes on for a while. So it's a little difficult to understand that changes moment by moment. It's just not obvious. Kind of, a rap song or something, it's really fast, so then you can see that it's changing. But like just a monotone kind of sound. So take the subject, that monotone sound. If it is impermanent because it's a product. I understand that it's a product, but I haven't understood yet on that basis that because it is a product, it is impermanent. So then I take another example that helps me to understand it. The last moment of a candle flame. Because it is a product of causes and conditions, therefore it's impermanent. If I understand that on the basis of that example, I can then move to the subject and understand the same. I think the confusion is, for Doris, for instance, when I formulate it, I start A is B because it's C. And now I'm saying, oh, if A is C, it's also B. I'm starting from the bottom. But that's okay for the sake of understanding. You start anywhere you want. Is there still... Sorry, I'm getting too fast. I'm actually also getting too fast. But does that kind of make sense a little bit? That I understand that sound, if sound is a product, sound must be impermanent. So understand that pervasion now on the basis of sound. That's what I want to understand. I want to fully understand that because sound is a product, therefore sound must be impermanent. Because sound is dependently originated, it doesn't exist intrinsically. I want to understand that, right? Take the subject I. Because it exists in dependence on other phenomena, it doesn't exist intrinsically. But I don't get that right away. Not on the basis of the I. On the basis of something else, I may understand it. For instance, on the basis of the table. Oh, because the table exists in dependence on other phenomena, therefore the table can't exist intrinsically. So the example helps me to understand that if that is true for the table, it must be true for the I as well. That's the purpose of the example. So here, in the same way, if a bodhisattva on the 8th ground is not inferior to a 1st ground bodhisattva because they've realized emptiness, then an arhat is neither. Right?
Miss the knot.
That is so natural. Missing the knot. Yeah, I know. Oh my God, how many times did I miss the knot? No, this is so... we don't talk like that. But when you debate, you talk like that every day, and before long, you can't talk any other way when you try to convince someone. All right. Anyway, sorry. We've gone through one confusion. So, but you see, this is just a matter of getting used to it. But you get the logic. It makes sense, doesn't it? All right. But now, just a sec. So take the subject, an arhat. Their being who's realized emptiness, according to the Prasangika school, because a bodhisattva on the 1st ground does not surpass them. They're equal in terms of their realization of emptiness. Okay, is that a correct syllogism or not?
Yes.
You may think yes, but it's not. Sorry, yeah, bummer. Sorry. Tommy, you wanted to say something?
So, for example, the goal is to make the defendant be convinced in the pervasion.
Mm-hmm. No. You want to the pervasion they understood, but you want them to understand the pervasion on the basis of the subject. The pervasion they've understood on the basis of the example. They've understood the pervasion. Otherwise, they would not be a candidate for the syllogism. You have to understand the pervasion, but you don't understand it on the basis of the subject. Because if you do, this is something, I'm only mentioning it now, okay? Because as I said before, to introduce you to syllogisms, to give you all the facts is going to overwhelm you. So I'm just leading you along through the facts as we go along. So one thing that I haven't stressed enough, we talk about a fitting or a viable candidate for a syllogism. Not everyone is. I said in the beginning of this session, I said, we hear about the reasoning that establishes reincarnation in the 2nd chapter of a text called Pramanavartika. But we are not candidates necessarily of that reasoning. That's the thing. You need to have certain requirements in order to be a candidate for a syllogism. And those requirements are, you haven't understood the thesis yet. Okay? So as long as the syllogism is only a correct syllogism if when it is addressed to you, you haven't understood You haven't understood the thesis yet. And in fact, there are these 3 modes that we discussed and we go through again now. Every time you realize these 3 modes, you still haven't realized the thesis. So in other words, you understand, for instance, in this case here, that the subject, an arhat, is not surpassed by a first ground bodhisattva in terms of wisdom. That you have understood. You've understood the pervasion also on the basis of the example. So these are the requirements, basically. The forward pervasion, anyway, we'll go through it. The forward pervasion, the reverse pervasion. You've understood all that, but you still have not understood the thesis. Then that's when you're a correct candidate. Okay? And you've also understood every element. You've understood Hira and solitary realizer are. You know what that means. You know what it means to realize the absence of intrinsic existence. And you know what it means for a bodhisattva to not surpass someone in terms of intelligence. Right? You know all that. Okay, having understood all that and having understood the pervasion and the reason being established, now is this a correct consequence or not? And the answer is no. But it's not obvious. You think first, and that's why this is one of the debates. If someone debates this to me, my first answer would be like, yes, it is, just as you did, with much confidence. I would answer just like that. But when you analyze it, you realize, oh no, it's not. Okay, let's look at it. Yeah.
Why is an example needed?
Pardon?
Why is an example needed?
Say again?
What is the purpose of an example?
What is the purpose of the example? To understand the pervasion. But you can only understand the pervasion on the basis of an example. Wherever there's smoke, there's fire. I mean, you know that from a camping fire, for instance. Whatever is a product, the moment when I ask you, whatever is the product of causes and conditions must be impermanent, you're thinking of something. Right? Maybe more than one example. I mean, usually like more. In order to understand, whoever is a man is a human being. For instance, something as simple as that. Yeah, can you think of any man who is a man but not a human being? I mean, we wouldn't say celestial beings, some man and woman are, do we? But usually, just think of animals and humans. That's all. I mean, just think of these 2 categories. So whoever is a man is a human being. Can you think of anyone for whom that is not true? So you take examples. Okay, this man, human being. That man, human being. Okay, maybe some politicians don't seem very human. No, I'm kidding. No, but the point is, no, you see what I'm saying, right? So whoever is, and you take examples. To understand a pervasion, you can only understand a pervasion by way of understanding that whatever is the one must also be the other. In everyday life, we don't talk about this. We just do it. We do it automatically, right? And sometimes we do it wrongly. Because that person doesn't smile at me, it follows they don't like me. I mean, we sometimes draw wrong conclusions about things. Or because they smile at me, they like me. That's not, but it's again on the basis of examples, right? Someone smiling or someone making a grouchy or a grumpy face, then therefore they're angry. There's no pervasion, of course. So certain things, there's no pervasion. But again, we do it all the time. We try to infer things. Am I right? We do it all the time. We try to infer. Because we don't know. So we take reasons and we take other examples when that was true. Reflect on it. Oh yeah, that was true then. It was supposed to be true in this case. And sometimes it's correct and sometimes it's not. Right? Sorry, again, this is a class on logic again, and this is the last time because this was the only time really we're doing this logic part. But that's just what the whole discussions are about. So the ensuing discussion centers on whether this syllogism constitutes a correct syllogism and therefore satisfies the 3 modes of a valid reason. And here's just the naming of these 3 modes, and then of course they're explained. The property of the subject, the forward pervasion, and the reverse pervasion. With regard to the first of these, the property of the subject. Okay, the question is whether the reason is established for the subject. So in other words, is the reason a feature of the subject? In the present case, the subject is a hira, a solitary realizer, arhat, and the reason is not being surpassed in intelligence by a bodhisattva on the first ground. Okay? It's clear, right? Arhat, who's not surpassed by a bodhisattva on the first ground. Thus, from the point of view of intelligence, of course. I forgot that. I forgot that. No, I did say in intelligence. Not being surpassed in intelligence by a bodhisattva on the first ground. Thus, for the first mode to be satisfied, it must be the case that such an arhat is not surpassed in intelligence by a bodhisattva on the first ground, which indeed holds. But, however, this alone is not sufficient for the first mode to be satisfied. The addressee to whom the syllogism is directed would also have to cognize this fact prior to generating an inferential cognition of the thesis. So before you can come to understand that a hero or solitary realizer, arhat, so an arhat is a being who has attained the realization of absence of intrinsic existence. In other words, the arhat has realized emptiness. Before you come to understand that, you must understand the property of the subject, right? In other words, before inferring the thesis, the addressee would have to cognize that a hero or solitary realizer, arhat, is not surpassed in intelligence by a bodhisattva on the first ground. Yet this is impossible. Anyone who understands that an arhat is not surpassed in this way also understands that the arhat has realized emptiness. Right? So that's the point here. You understand, okay, first of all, an arhat, you understand that the arhat is not surpassed by a first ground bodhisattvas in intelligence. Well, what would be the only reason that they could not be is because of realized emptiness. So in this case, you would know. But this is only half of what I'm going to say. It gets worse. Since there's no other explanation for their not being surpassed by a first ground bodhisattva. Consequently, cognition of the first mode entails cognition of the thesis. The addressee does not first realize the property of the subject and only then infer the thesis. So that's the whole point. That's the whole. I was going to say Kuchile in the wrong classroom, but no, you're not. You look so much like a Tibetan or Himalayan region. But this is not the case. You see, the thing is, the whole purpose of a correct syllogism is that the reason establishes something, but first you have to understand the property of the subject and the pervasion before the thesis is established. So there's a sequence. Okay. Therefore, the syllogism does not satisfy the first mode. Okay. For the syllogism to be correct, the addressee must first realize the three modes and only then infer the thesis on that basis. If realization of any of the modes entails cognition of the thesis, the reasoning cannot function as the means of generating that inference and is therefore not a correct syllogism. Okay. Now, of course, this is again learning. Oh, yeah, of course. Yes, please. This is a little bit unusual. I mean, to learn about logic, it takes some time. We learn this for like a few months. And again, talking about it is not as effective as actually debating. So it's a bit like I said before, like trying to teach you how to drive a car and constantly talk about what you need to do to drive a car, but not getting you to drive. But of course, this is just not the setting for a debate. So, but that's usually how it would be explained in a book or in a text. So regarding the latter two modes, okay, the first one, first mode is not established. We already established, or we proved that. Regarding the latter two mode, there is a pervasion. You could say it's correct to say anyone whom bodhisattvas on the first ground are unable to outshine or surpass in terms of intelligence must necessarily have attained the realization of the absence of intrinsic existence, right? If you're not able to be so what does it mean to be outshone or surpassed in terms of intelligence? It means you haven't realized emptiness. That's the whole thing we discussed earlier. So that is actually true here. Conversely, anyone who's not attained the realization of the absence of intrinsic existence is necessarily someone whom such bodhisattvas are capable of outshining in this respect, right? It goes both ways. Whatever is the reason is necessarily the predicate. Whatever is not the predicate is necessarily not the reason. So that is also true. However, despite all that being factually correct, as in the case of the first mode, for the forward and reverse pervasion to be satisfied, The addressee must realize these pervasions on the basis of the syllogism's example before generating an inferential cognition of the thesis. Moreover, they have to understand other elements of the syllogism. This includes cognizing the subject, predicate, and reason, as well as the relationship between the reason and the predicate. Okay, understand all these elements. So you have to understand an arhat, you have to understand the predicate, and you have to understand. So in the present case, this requires the addressee to recognize the subject of the syllogism, a hero of solitary realizer, arhat. The Sanskrit term arhat denotes a being who has attained liberation from samsara. So you have to understand what an arhat is, someone who has attained liberation from samsara. Cognizing such a being entails understanding that they have eliminated the root of samsara, the ignorance that grasps at intrinsic existence, and the other mental afflictions, such as attachment and anger, through the direct realization of emptiness. There you know, right away you know, when you know what an arhat is, it's not just saying, oh, arhat, and you go, oh, I know that word, okay, I realize an arhat. It doesn't work like that. You have to understand what really an arhat means. What is an arhat? What does it refer to? Someone who's liberated. Liberated from what? From the root misconception. Well, the root misconception, there's nothing wrong with that. Oh yeah, there is. What's wrong with the root misconception? It's a wrong consciousness. Why is it a wrong consciousness? Its object doesn't exist. Then you know intrinsic existence doesn't exist. So in other words, in order to understand what an arhat is, you first have to realize emptiness. To understand what an arhat is, like I said, it means someone who's liberated. So you have to understand that they're liberated. But we're liberated from what? The Chinese government? No. I mean, I'm just saying. I mean, you know, this morning I translated for someone. We talked about politics, and so yeah, it was liberation meant from the Chinese government. But no, this is about here, of course, liberation from what? From the root of samsara. That root misconception I talked about in the very beginning, which means the mind that holds on to intrinsic existence. You can only understand that someone is liberated from that if you understand it's a wrong mind in the first place. You cannot remove a correct mind. You cannot remove a correct mind. There's nothing that can remove it, right? The simple example, I talked about a snake in your cupboard. If you have fear of the snake in the cupboard, and there's no snake inside, how can you remove the fear? You remove the fear by understanding the opposite of what you're perceiving. You're perceiving a snake in the cupboard. Well, if you understand there is no snake in the cupboard, you remove that misconception, and therefore your fear is gone. If there is a snake in the cupboard, realizing that there is no snake in the cupboard is not going to work, right? Because you can't realize that. It's not going to be a correct mind. The only way to get rid of your fear is get rid of the snake. Do you see what I'm saying? Of course, you can remove the fear of the snake when there is an actual snake in the cupboard, but not by realizing something. But not by realizing the opposite of what is actually there. Because that would be a wrong consciousness. You can't realize the absence of snake in a cupboard when there is a snake in the cupboard. You can't realize that. Does that make sense? You can just have a wrong view on that, a wrong mind. But in the case of a wrong consciousness, that can be removed by a mind that is the exact opposite. If there's no snake in the cupboard and you believe there is, it can be removed by the mind that understands there is no snake in the cupboard. And that's easy. Snakes, who cares? You know, it's not a big deal. I mean, sure, they're scary, but depending on what they are. But the point is here, it's about a misconception that is the troublemaker. I mean, the root of all our problems is exaggerating the existence of the I and other phenomena. So perceiving the self to exist intrinsically. What is the solution? Understanding the opposite. It's not there. Realizing, fully comprehending, it's impossible. Right? Logically comprehending that, no way. And that's it. You're free. Therefore, to understand a person who's liberated means understanding a person who's attained this freedom through this realization. In other words, understanding that someone is an arhat, you understand that they've realized emptiness. Does the logic make sense? In fact, to understand liberation, to understand Buddhahood, what happened?
She said yes. It makes sense.
Oh, she said yes. Yeah. She's so clever. She's going to get it. She's going to work out and explain it back to everyone. So, like, in fact, to realize liberation and enlightenment, it also requires us to realize emptiness. So, to realize that enlightenment and liberation are possible, you actually have to realize emptiness first. So, therefore, did you have a debate on that?
No, not a debate, but one of his big doubts.
Okay. But the thing is, you can still wish to become liberated based on faith or based on conviction, being convinced that liberation is possible, being convinced that enlightenment is possible. You may still wish for it, but it's safer. It's what's the word? More reliable, because conviction can be lost. Faith can be lost. It's shaky. Okay, faith based on reasoning is a lot more stable, but that's why in the text they say there are disciples of the Buddha of greater, I don't want to say mental capacity, it's like, kind of sounds so, we have to be nowadays so careful not to say less intelligence. I mean, the Tibetans say sharp and dull. I mean, they just get down to it, you know, but no one is offended when they're called dull, so it's not a big deal. But the words are literally of dull intelligence and of sharp intelligence. But, you know, it's all relative, sharp and dull and so forth. But basically saying we should be of sharp intelligence. So someone of sharper intelligence first wants to figure out whether all this makes sense or not. All this makes sense. So it's actually recommended to realize emptiness first. And once you know phenomena don't exist intrinsically, you know your misconception is a wrong mind. And you know you can remove it. And you know that liberation is possible. Right? And only then you start to generate the wish to reach that state. Yeah? But it may take a little longer to actually get there, to actually. So that's why a lot of people say, okay, never mind, one day I'll realize it, but I'll already wish for it now because I'm convinced. For the time being, I'm convinced. Okay. Anyway, going back to all this here, so you see the ripple effect of not realizing this, that, and the other, which means not realizing that someone is an arhat, while on the other hand, you realize, once you realize someone is an arhat, you realize that they've realized emptiness. You know that they've realized emptiness, and that defeats the purpose of the reason to establish something that you haven't yet established. The moment you understand the three modes, I mean, in preparation for understanding the three modes, you actually have to understand each element of the syllogism, and that one element is knowing the subject, understanding what the subject means, understanding what the predicate means, understanding what the reason means. And in that moment, you've already understood the thesis. So it's not a correct syllogism. Yeah. But you can see in the debate how first you hear it, honestly, if I hear this syllogism without thinking about it and not being familiar with this particular type of syllogism, I would right away say, of course it's a correct syllogism. Yeah. But you only do that once, and then once that's proven to you that that's not the case, you really get a sense, oh, understanding a Buddha is not that easy. Even if you meet Buddha Shakyamuni right now on the street, you wouldn't know he's a Buddha. You could believe that, you know, this person is a Buddha. But knowing means you must know they have realized emptiness. And to know someone has realized emptiness, you must know what emptiness means. Yeah. Okay.
Syllogism would be correct if it was pointed to an arhat.
If it wasn't pointed at an arhat,
No, if it was.
it would be correct. Oh, yes. Oh, it was directed at an... Yeah, no, but then they would already realize, the arhat would have realized the thesis in the first place.
Maybe not.
But they've realized emptiness, but don't know that arhats realize emptiness?
No, but they might not ever thought about whether they were surpassed by a first level bodhisattva.
No, but that's not the thesis. The thesis is an arhat is a being who has attained the realization of the absence of intrinsic existence. That's the thesis, right?
But didn't that come from previous where we were talking about whether first level Bodhisattva surpassed an Arhat or not.
Yeah, but that's not the thesis here. That's not what you're trying to establish,
Okay,
right?
I thought that what we're trying to establish now is a continuum of that.
It is a continuum of that, that's true, but right now, we're just analyzing the syllogism itself. Is it a correct one or not? Yeah, okay. All right, I know. This confusion is so natural, I know, it's just so much part of it. So it's just a matter of being more familiar with this way of thinking. Never mind, we're almost done. And then no.
For example,
Yep.
you gave.
Yeah.
If someone believes an Arhat is someone who abandoned the Rose misconception.
Pardon?
If someone believes an Arhat is someone who abandoned the Rose misconception.
If someone is an Arhat who
No, if
believes...
someone believes what is an Arhat,
Oh,
an
someone...
Arhat is someone who abandoned the root misconception.
Oh, yeah,
This
okay.
root misconception,
Mhm.
he doesn't think it's grasping to inherent existence,
Mm-hmm.
but he thinks it's grasping to autonomous substantial itself. So when this is what we think is an Arhat. So according to what you said now, they don't know what is an Arhat, so they cannot get the syllogism. But I don't know, I think such a syllogism would be effective for them, no?
Okay, so Thomas' argument is, and sorry if I keep forgetting to repeat what you guys say for those not here. So Thomas' point is, if someone believes an Arhat, mistakenly believes an Arhat, doesn't mean someone who realizes emptiness in order to become an Arhat, but someone who realizes a coarser level of selflessness. So understanding that there is no self that acts as an owner, kind of a utilizer of mind and body. That's a coarser version of emptiness or of selflessness. So they would believe that this person who's eliminated such is an Arhat. It actually comes up. There's a particular type of Arhat that is described. Like exactly, that's an Arhat according to the Svatantrika school,
Yes,
or Chittamatra and so forth school. So, but still for them, the syllogism would be effective. Sure, why not? But it would not be a correct syllogism. By definition, a correct syllogism, so it just doesn't fulfill the definition. It can still be effective. Take the subject, the Arhat, they realize emptiness because they're not surpassed by. Maybe it makes them think, okay, yeah, maybe they do realize emptiness and so forth. But it's still not a syllogism in the strictest sense of the word. Again, we had this whole discussion about, like, is this initial reasoning a correct syllogism or not? Well, even if it's not, it can still be effective. But what we analyzed was more, is it a logically correct syllogism? That's what we tried to analyze, right? Yeah, so anyway, having a start, I mean, I'm torturing through all this. And I think half of you, or maybe more, are thinking, what do I care? I want to hear about emptiness. But what was the promise I made? Initially, I was like, there are certain bits that, and this is, I think, the only time really off the top of my head. I could be wrong when all these syllogisms and consequences are most important. So it doesn't really come up again. But to give you an impression of everything that you learn, I have to go through it, whether you fully understand it or not. But at least you get a sense. I mean, you know a little bit more than you did before we started on the reasoning. And that's sufficient. And again, we're almost done with this. Anyway, so this is impossible. Anyone who understands an Arhat is not... Oh, wait, where did I get to? The addressee does not first realize... Oh, no, I did that. In the present case, requires the addressee to recognize the subject of the syllogism, a hero, a solitary realizer, Arhat. The Sanskrit term Arhat denotes a being who has attained liberation from samsara. You can read about it in the Tibetan, in the little footnote, what exactly that means, but I don't need to go into that. Cognizing such a being entails understanding that they have eliminated the root of samsara, the ignorance that grasps at intrinsic existence, and the other mental afflictions such as attachment and anger through the direct realization of emptiness. Because otherwise, how would you know they're liberated? Liberated from what? Thus, when the addressee, the person at whom the syllogism is addressed, realizes the subject as a hero, a solitary realizer, Arhat, or realizes the subject, a hero and solitary realizer, Arhat, it should be, not as a hero, a solitary realizer. So if they realize the subject, they must understand that this being has attained the realization of the absence of intrinsic existence. Since this is precisely what the thesis states, it's already cognized at that point. The former pervasion is therefore also not satisfied because it does not function as the means that gives rise to a subsequent inferential realization of the thesis. Okay, so that's it. Now, when expressed in the form of a structure of debate, if you want to know how it's debated now in the kind of debate language, it would be saying this. Take the subject, the first reasoning. It follows that it's a correct consequence that can be reformulated as a subject, right? So you say, take the subject, right? Okay, and the other person, first they say, I accept. You don't know, right? Like, wait a second, can you let me think about it for 5 minutes? No, no. You have no time to think, you have to answer. That's the beauty of debate as well. It's like, you make a mistake, it's fine, you know, don't be scared of making mistakes. You have to answer in the spur of the moment. You probably make mistakes, and if the person is well prepared, they're like, I'm getting them, you know, in the right direction. So it's like, and they say, I accept. If they say, why do you ever give a reason why no, then they don't know. So they're safer just saying, yes, I accept. Take the subject, the first reasoning. It follows that if, while retaining the same subject, the opposite of its reason is taken as the predicate and the opposite of its predicate as the reason, it constitutes a correct syllogism, right? That consequence, it can be switched around to I accept. Now, what I just said probably didn't make sense to you much. It takes as the predicate and the opposite blah. But when you hear it again and again, dalo cholo, dalo chusku, cholo dasku, you've heard it so many times, you know exactly what it's meant. So you say, I accept. Okay, posit that correct syllogism. You ask the other person, posit the syllogism. So they posit the syllogism as we had it before. Take the subject and so forth. So after that, now the person debating say, take the subject, the syllogism you just recited. It follows that it's a correct syllogism. They say, I accept. It follows that it's not a correct syllogism. So you see, first you go like, okay, so you're saying it's a correct syllogism. It follows it is, I accept. It follows it is not a correct syllogism because it does not satisfy. So they say, why? It follows that it's not a correct syllogism. Why? Because it does not satisfy the three modes. The reason is not established. I don't agree that you're saying it doesn't satisfy the three modes. Take the subject, the syllogisms you just recited. It follows it does not satisfy the three modes because it does not satisfy the property of the subject. The reason is not established. It does satisfy the property of the subject, the other person says. And you say, take the subject, the syllogisms you just recited. It follows it does not satisfy the property of the subject because as part of its first mode, the property of the subject, the addressee needs to realize that a hearer or solitary realizer is not surpassed in intelligence by a bodhisattva on the first ground. No pervasion. Even though they have to realize that, but that doesn't mean that the first part, that doesn't mean that the property of the subject is not satisfied. Take the subject, the addressee of that syllogism is followed that they realize a hearer or solitary realizer is not surpassed in intelligence by a bodhisattva on the first ground. I accept. Take the subject of the syllogism. It follows is not a correct syllogism. Why? Because this property of the subject is not satisfied. The reason is not established. Take the subject, that syllogism. It follows that the property of the subject is not satisfied. Oh my God, I did something wrong here. I copy-pasted something in a way that... oh my God, what did I do? Allez, so I think I copy-pasted and I wrote the same thing twice. So anyway, I have to give it to you again without that extra. I think it's extra, but right now I don't have the time to just read through it slowly. Anyway, so at the very end, really what you say, in conclusion, take the subject, that syllogism. When the property of the subject is realized, its thesis is cognized because anyone who understands that an arhat is not surpassed by a first ground bodhisattva in intelligence must also understand that the arhat has realized emptiness, since there's no other explanation for their not being surpassed in this way by a first ground bodhisattva. So I only went thus far. But the thing is, I already explained that to you before, but I wanted you to see how that could possibly kind of develop in a debate. What the other person says, how you can respond. But I'm really saying it, what I just said in the debate, I already explained before, just to get you a sense of the structure of the debate. And then it can go on and on and on in that way. Similarly, another debate that you could also do, take the subject, that syllogism. It follows that it does not satisfy the forward pervasion. Why? Well, because when the forward pervasion is realized, its thesis is cognized. Again, there are lots of typos in there. Its thesis is cognized. The reason is not established. Take the subject, that syllogism. It follows that when the forward pervasion is realized, its thesis is cognized because its addressee realizes the subject. Right? No pervasion. So they do realize the subject because they realize every element. They need to know what the subject is. They need to know what the predicate is. They need to know what the reason is. To know what the subject is, you know that they're an arhat. But if they say there's no pervasion, well, there is a pervasion because when its addressee cognizes the subject, they realize an arhat. And the cognition of such a liberated being involves the understanding that an arhat has attained the realization of emptiness. Okay? So the last bit really is just, as I said, just getting you a sense. When two people are debating, they do it in Tibetan. This is a translation of the debate. But then you know how they go about it. And although the past and answering is pretty limited in terms of the answers they can give, but all the answers address exactly the structure of the reasoning. So you can discuss anything. It seems impossible. Without discussing things in the ordinary way, you can still discuss anything. There's no limit. It seems impossible, but it perfectly works. Well, Maya would know because she learned how to debate in English. Yeah. All right. So this is the hardest bit with all the debates and everything. And then with the other reasonings, with regard to the other reasonings, it's easier. So when we look at the other reasonings, I'm not going to go through all the debates and everything. There's no need. Okay, so with the next one, I'll just briefly explain it. It's very straightforward. Yes. Where do we get to? There's not much left. We got to page 160. Oh my gosh, 160. Oh, I have to give you new material. You only have up till 167, right? So you've got 4 pages left. Yeah, I've prepared the other material, but I still have to work through it because you're going to get the answers to what I said to you before. I'll work on that tomorrow. Okay, great. Any questions? Yes.
Geshe-la, what I always wonder, the people from the lower schools,
Yes.
they're not stupid either, right?
No.
Right?
No.
I mean, they're amazing.
Stupid. I'll repeat the questions. Yeah.
They're amazing. They're logicians, right? They know their stuff also, right?
Yeah.
So why don't they get it?
Okay.
Right?
So, okay.
Because you said, one has to get, if something is not according to reality.
Yes.
But other people, you have a different view, you have your reasonings behind it.
Right. Yes.
Everybody supports it, and then,
Yeah.
Okay,
so Venerable Kumbila is saying, well, the so-called lower schools, we call them lower schools in relation to basically emptiness, or the kind of selflessness, emptiness that they describe. The further they're away from emptiness according to the Prasangika school, the lower they are considered. But don't get that wrong. I mean, we're trying to be so politically correct these days. It's not about like judging anyone. I mean, it's just kind of using a term because it makes it easier, number one. And you're saying they're not stupid, so why don't they get it kind of idea? I mean, why don't they eventually, it's all about realizing ultimate reality, so why are they stuck in those views? They don't actually exist any longer, I don't think. I mean, the thing is, they did exist at the time of the Buddha. I don't think there is a country with people who are Vaibhashikas now, or Satantrikas. I don't know. I don't know about the Theravada tradition. You see, what we need to understand that this is a pedagogical tool. Like it's a tool to understand the highest view. Now, when the Buddha was around, things were different. I mean, Buddha taught Buddhism for the first time in this world, and it was new to a lot of people. I mean, I don't know, maybe there were some who already had these ideas, and the Buddha right away taught a lot of his disciples right away the highest view because he taught the Prasangika view. But there were others, when they first received teachings, it would have been overwhelming. I mean, think of yourself when you first heard about Buddhism. I certainly, my first course was not on emptiness, or it was on there's no self. I didn't even know what that meant. And the teacher didn't talk about lack of intrinsic existence, more like there's no separate owner, like there's no self-sufficient, substantially existent I. And that was still like, whoa. So therefore, I mean, the view I was taught first was pretty much like Vaibhashika. But I worked my way through, you know, it's like over time, I learned more and more. And I mean, not that my view is really Prasangika. I mean, in terms of intellectually, you know, right now I may claim so. But honestly, I think still like a non-Buddhist. I mean, a lot of my views, you know, and Vaibhashika or Satyajika, I don't know, the way I live, the way I react, that's a different matter. But that's not what it is all about. It's about intellectually understanding these views, whether they're still around or not. Historically, there were followers of these systems. At the time, just briefly after the Buddha had taught them, he set them forth. Then these schools developed. So there were followers of these schools, but I think over time, and I said that before, we need to be aware that it's not like there were totally different people then. I mean, we are the continuation of these people from that time. Whether we were around the Buddha, we don't know. Some of us may have been. I think Rika said, oh, we must have really messed up that we're still stuck in samsara now. She's right. I mean, like in the past, if we were around at the time of the Buddha, 2,600 years, we're still here. We weren't the fastest when it comes to, but who knows, right? Who knows? The point is that there's been a development in general. There's been a development. The different schools that existed at the time of the Buddha, no, they're no longer there. But their views are still there. And we still utilize them, as I said, for different reasons. And two of the main reasons are that the lower schools, they do always introduce us to something that is new to us. For instance, the kind of self that they deny. That's still not something we fully realize, that core selflessness. But what they also do is they express into words a wrong view, which we hold, but we never put into words. That is one of the greatest difficulties we also face, is not only are we unable to remove our wrong views because we just don't realize the opposite. So in the case of the opposite of a self-sufficient, substantially existent I, we just don't realize the absence of such an I, but we're not even aware of our other wrong views. That is the first step, which is why it's also helpful to study some of the non-Buddhist systems. Simply because these non-Buddhist systems, they express some of the views we instinctively hold. I cannot come up with an example right now. Well, maybe an example would be when Aidan, he sent this video in the group. What are numbers? Remember the video, the number file or something, and this British mathematician saying, how do numbers actually exist? Numbers are very interesting because they're such a huge part of our everyday life. Much more than of the everyday life of a Tibetan. Now, numbers being such a huge part, how do numbers exist? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are three options he presents. One is Platonism. Plato's view that there are these numbers that exist outside of time and space, right? Beyond time and space. They're like universals in that sense, like there's a universal 1, a universal 2. And you can then utilize them to count things. Number 2, the nominalist view, or no, the second one was the fictation, fictive. They're fictation. They're what's the word? Fictive? No, that's the German word. They're fictation. They're
Fictitious.
pardon?
Fictitious.
Fictitious. Is that a word? Okay. Yeah, fiction. Never mind. They don't exist. They don't exist. We just use them. We just made them up, but they actually don't exist. And the third one is they do exist, but they don't exist outside of time and space. They're just labeled on the basis of, let's say, 2 pieces of cake or 2 pence and so forth. They're just labeled. Now, that they're only labeled, it makes sense to us because we learned that in the Prasangika school. But wouldn't we have believed previously to really studying this that the numbers exist outside of time and space because of the consistency? If they were merely labeled, it seems impossible that you have 10 centimeters, like a certain size, or pi for that matter. That pi is always the same size. You always have the same result, no matter how big the circle is. How is that possible if it's just nominative, if it's just labeled? So it seems like if something is always the case, I remember Rika talking about time. If time were only labeled, how come that an hour has 60 seconds and it always does? You see, saying something is merely labeled seems to imply a lot more freedom in kind of creating things, which is not. That's merely labeled doesn't mean we make things up. And we could make an hour be, 61 seconds, Or, the thing is, if we do, we have to be consistent once again. Okay, let's decide. That's what the Tibetans did, with the moon calendar. They have like 30 days, 12 months in a year. So they have to, in order for the month, for it to work, they have to cut at least one day every 2 months. That is, they have 12 months. And on one day, so we know that because we go to Sojong as nuns, right? As monks and nuns, we go to Sojong. And as part of the ritual, Sojong, which is the confession we do when we renew our vows, the vows that can be renewed. So these vows, it's usually we say it's the 15th day. So every 15 days you have a Sojong. But in 12 months, the first month, the third, the fifth, so those of the uneven month, the second Sojong is always on the 14th, right? Because they have 6 days too much, the system of like calculating the moon. So they had to take out these 6 days, which is why we have 6 Sojongs a year, which are not on the 15th, but on the 14th. And you have to recite something really quickly. And because you say 15th all the time, on those days when it's the 14th, you need to be really focused. Last time it was the 14th, I kept saying 15th. Anyway, so what I'm trying to say is that there are systems where we have to find a kind of a rule. We can't just make things up that a year has 370 days or something because we feel like it. Things are going to get confusing. So being merely labeled, the point I'm trying to make is that there's still consistencies. There's still laws of nature because we're not creating things. If we created them, they wouldn't exist. So you have the two extremes between our mind has nothing to do with reality. That's Platonism pretty much. Things are out there. The second is nothing is there. We just created it. And the third is the middle way. Okay? And that's what's so difficult. Now, going back to your original question about, what was your original question? Sorry.
Why doesn't logic as a tool then also lead the lower schools?
Oh, and so, sorry, I did get confused. Yeah. So I wanted to talk about Platonism. So what I'm trying to say is with I really got, sorry. So what I tried to say was that we study these non-Buddhist systems to understand that we may also hold this Platonist view and so forth. It helps us to become aware of these wrong views. Anyway, having said all this, therefore it becomes clear that studying the different philosophical systems are extremely helpful. They train the mind in a very profound way to understand the highest view. And those who follow these schools, they probably moved on to the Prasangika school. That's why I believe nowadays you no longer have them. I don't know. I've not talked to all of them. I mean, even within the Tibetan tradition that claims to be based on the Prasangika school, I don't know what their views actually are. But in general, I don't think there are any Buddhist societies that still propagate really the Vaibhashika view or the Sautrantika. I don't even know whether they historically ever existed in that way. Probably did, but I'm sure there are many different variations of them as well. And the Tibetans chose one variation that I found most effective pedagogically. So yeah, I believe that the Buddha taught them initially these views, and sooner or later they saw a what do you call it, a contradiction or an inconsistency, and then approached the Buddha and said, well, you said such and such, but now I don't, and there are accounts of like masters of the past. For instance, Acharya Vasubandhu was initially a follower of the Vaibhashika school, and then later on, Satantrika, and then he moved on to the Chittamatra school. Some of his writings being from the point of view of the Satantrika, later on from the point of view of the Chittamatra. Therefore, even within one lifetime, you have so-called proponents of the Svatantrika school and many other schools. But then it's obvious, when you look at their history, that they didn't hold that view because they were eighth ground bodhisattvas and so forth. In other words, they must have realized emptiness from the point of view of the Prasangika school, but they felt there were still candidates in society that would greatly benefit right now from the Chittamatra view, for instance. So they explained it, because the thing is, there's more than one life. And a lot of the great masters of the past, they understood if they presented this view in this lifetime, okay, this person would follow this particular view. Maybe in 2 lifetimes they would, but then their minds would be so trained that very quickly they'd understand the highest view and very quickly reap the benefit from understanding it correctly. Yeah, so that is my take on that. And again, like when you study the tenet, what I keep myself thinking is, yeah, that makes a lot of, some of the lower schools, so-called lower schools, and I get it. I think, yeah, that makes sense. That's how I look at the world. I definitely have a sense there's this objective world out there. I mean, my view on that is Vaibhashika, absolutely. I'm a Vaibhashika in many situations, right? I'm not a Prasangika school the way I live I'm not a Prasangika person the way I live my life. And the whole thing here is not about intellectual understanding. It's about living these ideas. And I know plenty of people who really hold a view that seems very much Chittamatran, right? And I sometimes seem to be talking about Chittamatra. To be honest, I have to also watch my own way of talking about things when I put too much emphasis on the mind. Atalea, she posted this message in the group. And I recognized myself in that criticism. I thought, oh yeah, I don't know whether she was addressing me or not. It doesn't matter, but I did feel addressed. As in like putting so much emphasis on the mind that it seems the mind becomes the substantial kind of concrete thing. What am I doing, right? I mean, I'm really teaching Chittamatra in that moment if I put too much emphasis on the mind. So this whole thing is not so much about, this is what I think the world is. No. This is what I think the world is. So I'm pointing at my emotions. Yes. So am I really a Prasangika person? That's something we need to ask ourselves. Am I living and thinking like no. No. I can say that categorically, no, right? And in so many different situations, sometimes I think maybe like a Chittamatra person, sometimes like a, I don't know, Platonist kind of ideas of like numbers being, I don't know. That's the beauty, well, not the beauty, not so much beautiful, but the flexibility of our own mind. We can have the weirdest wrong view one minute and be so clever the next, right? So the flexibility of our own mind. Okay. Sorry, that went on for a little longer, but we're done. So for all of us, upset with syllogisms and consequences, done, over with. So we will still quickly read through the next part, but then we're going back to bits that we can relate to better. Okay, great. So let's dedicate all the positive potential we've accumulated. In the snow-encircled land, you are the source of benefit and bliss. Avalokiteshvara, Denzin Gyatso, please remain in life until samsara ends. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, rise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. May the precious view of emptiness not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. Okay, thank you.
Okay.